A devastating reality is about to hit millions across America this fall, and the most frightening part is how ordinary the people it comes for are going to look, not the people you were taught to worry about. Not the reckless, not the irresponsible, not the ones who made obvious mistakes. It is coming for the family 2 doors down who mow their lawn every Saturday. It is coming for the coworker who never misses a shift. It is coming for the couple who did everything right, who saved what little they could, who paid their bills on time for 20 years, and who are about to discover that doing everything right stopped being enough somewhere along the way, and nobody told them. Because the reality arriving this fall does not care about your character. It does not check whether you deserve it. It is structural, it is scheduled, and it has been building quietly underneath the surface of normal American life while everyone was told the economy was fine, the job market was strong, and the worst had already passed. This fall, millions of people are going to feel the floor give way beneath them for the first time, all at once in the same season, and they are going to look around and realize that the safety they believed in was a story, and the story is ending. The quiet machine that removes American families from their homes is running faster than it has in a generation, and this fall, it is about to process more human beings than at any point since the records began. Because a single county in Georgia is now evicting more people than the entire city of New York. Look at the number coming out of one ordinary American metro area, because it will tell you more about the reality arriving this fall than any speech from any politician. Metro Atlanta filed more than 144,000 eviction cases in a single year, a figure that surpassed the eviction filings of New York City and even exceeded the entire state of Virginia. And this is not some uniquely troubled corner of the country. It is a preview of what is spreading everywhere. Phoenix recorded its second-worst eviction year on record with nearly 85,000 cases. Across the 34 cities, the Princeton Eviction Lab actively tracks. More than 86,000 households were pushed out in a single month, and over 1 million households over the trailing year, and the filings now run more than 50% above the pre-pandemic average in multiple major cities. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb you, because it reveals that this is not a market accident, but a machine functioning exactly as designed. In states like Indiana, a landlord can process an eviction in as little as 10 days for a filing fee of around $100, a system built to move fast and cheap, with the legal deck stacked so heavily that tenants facing removal almost never have a lawyer, while landlords almost always do. One missed paycheck, one surprise medical bill, one car that breaks down at the wrong moment, and a working family that has never been late on anything gets a $100 filing slapped against them that will haunt their housing record for the next 7 years. Because the $1.3 billion tenant screening industry records every eviction filing permanently, even the ones that were dismissed, even the ones where the tenant was in the right, flagging that person as damaged goods to every future landlord who runs their name. And the demographic pattern removes any doubt that this is structural cruelty rather than neutral enforcement, because in Atlanta, black renters account for 71% of eviction filings while making up 53% of renters, and women with children are systematically targeted at more than double the rate of adults without kids, which means the machine is grinding hardest on the exact families least able to absorb the blow. The forces converging this fall make it worse in a way most people cannot see coming. Because pandemic-era protections have fully expired. Corporate landlords who bought up entire apartment complexes have raised rents by 40% or more in a few short years, and the federal government is actively cutting the rental assistance, the legal aid, and the enforcement staff that once slowed the machine down. Millions of Americans are going to watch this fall as neighbors they have known for years quietly disappear. A moving truck one weekend, an empty unit the next, and they will tell themselves it must have been something that family did wrong. Never understanding that the machine does not require you to do anything wrong. It only requires you to be one bad month away from the edge, which, this fall, describes almost everyone. Even if you never miss a payment and never face eviction, you are about to discover that you are trapped because the rental market has quietly sealed itself shut, and this fall the average working American cannot get approved for an apartment they could easily afford to pay for. Imagine doing everything a responsible person is supposed to do, holding a steady job, keeping a clean record, saving for the deposit, and still being told no, again and again by every apartment you apply for, until you realize with a cold dread that the door has been quietly closed and you are standing on the wrong side of it. That is the reality settling over the American rental market this fall, and it is a trap almost nobody sees until they are inside it. The typical rent in the United States now sits at around $2,050 a month, up again from the year before, and against that backdrop, the screening system that decides who gets an apartment has quietly tightened into a wall that locks out half of working America. Here is the mechanism nobody explains. The average American FICO credit score sits at around 716, but the typical credit floor that landlords now require has climbed to 730 or higher, which means the average American is now, by definition, below the line to rent a standard apartment. Layer on top of that a math rule invented in 1985, the requirement that your income be 3 times the monthly rent. A standard set back when median rent was a fraction of what it is today, and now applied to rents that have exploded far beyond wage growth, locking out an estimated half of all working renters purely on arithmetic. And then come the fees, the hidden cost wall that the rental industry has erected in the last decade. Application fees of $50 to $100 per unit that you never get back, whether you are approved or not. So a family applying to 10 apartments can spend over $1,000 simply for the privilege of being rejected 10 times. On top of the pet rent, the technology fee, the valet trash charge, the amenity surcharges, the junk line items invented to squeeze every dollar from people who have almost none left. And the cruelest gear in the machine is the one that connects back to eviction, because a single eviction filing, even one that was dismissed, even one where the tenant did nothing wrong, flags a renter in that $1.3 billion screening industry for 7 full years. And the system records failures permanently, while never recording successes by design, so that once you have been marked, the wall goes up and stays up. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition confirmed the structural truth underneath all of this, that no state and no major metropolitan area in the entire country has an adequate supply of affordable homes for its lowest-income renters. With a national shortage of more than 7 million affordable units, and only 1 in 4 households who qualify for housing assistance actually receives it. Millions will discover this fall that the rental collapse is not about being unable to pay. It is about being unable to get approved to pay. Trapped in whatever unit they currently hold, unable to move for a better job or a cheaper city, watching the renewal notice raise their rent knowing they cannot pass the screening anywhere else, caged by a system that was quietly rebuilt, wall by wall, while they were told the market would eventually sort itself out. Number 8. The single largest cause of bankruptcy in the wealthiest nation in history is not bad spending or gambling or reckless debt, it is getting sick. And this fall, as health premiums detonate and coverage vanishes, an illness you did not choose is about to become a financial death sentence for millions. Consider the cruelest arithmetic in American life, the one almost every other wealthy country on earth eliminated decades ago, that here, in the richest nation that has ever existed, the fastest way to lose everything you have built is to simply get sick. Roughly 100 million Americans are already carrying medical debt right now, today, before the fall even begins, and study after study has found that medical bills are involved in a majority of all personal bankruptcies, which means the leading driver of financial ruin in this country is not the casino and not the credit card. It is the emergency room. And this fall, that machinery is about to be fed a fresh wave of victims, because the enhanced health insurance subsidies that made coverage affordable for more than 22 million Americans expired at the end of last year. And when open enrollment opens on November 1st, those families will log in to renew and watch the number on the screen roughly double, from an average of around $888 a year to nearly $1,900, a jump that pushes a 60-year-old couple from paying 8.5% of their income for insurance to paying nearly a quarter of everything they earn. Faced with that, millions will do the only thing they can afford to do, which is drop the coverage entirely and gamble that they simply will not get sick, and KFF projects that effectuated enrollment could collapse by nearly 6 million people, stripping insurance from families right as they walk into the coldest, most illness-prone stretch of the year. Here is the disturbing part almost nobody connects. The trap hidden inside the timing. The people dropping coverage are not choosing to be reckless. They are choosing between the premium and the rent, between the deductible and the grocery bill, and the moment they let the coverage lapse, they are one diagnosis away from catastrophe. Because the same illness that a European or a Canadian would survive with a copay becomes, in America, a $75,000 hospital bill that lands on a family that could not afford $1,900 for insurance. And the bill does not simply go away when they cannot pay it. It goes to collections, it destroys their credit score, which, as you now know, is the exact same credit score that determines whether they can rent an apartment, which means a single unaffordable illness this fall can cascade directly into the eviction machine and the sealed rental market from the previous sections. One catastrophe feeding the next in a chain most people never see until they are trapped inside it. And even those who keep their insurance or discovering it protects them less every year, as deductibles have climbed past $1,700 for individuals and $3,500 for families. meaning you now pay thousands out of your own pocket before the coverage you are paying hundreds a month for even begins to help. 1 in 3 Americans has already reported skipping needed medical care, delaying the appointment, rationing the medication, not because they are careless but because they cannot afford it. And the terrible truth of preventive medicine is that the condition you cannot afford to catch early becomes the condition that kills you or bankrupts you later. Millions will face this fall as a quiet, private terror, the lump they are afraid to get checked, the chest pain they are hoping is nothing, the prescription they are stretching to half doses, all because the season arrived with their coverage gone and their savings drained, in a country that decided, uniquely among wealthy nations, that getting sick should cost you everything you have. The backbone of the working American family is about to snap this fall, because the cost of childcare has quietly surpassed the cost of rent, of college, of almost everything, and the federal money holding the entire system together has already run out, which means parents are about to be forced to choose between their jobs and their children. Think about the impossible math a working parent is doing at the kitchen table right now, because this fall it stops being difficult and becomes genuinely unsolvable for millions of them. Childcare in America has quietly become one of the largest expenses a family faces, in many states costing more per year than in-state college tuition, more than the average rent, more than a family spends on food and transportation combined, with the annual cost of infant care exceeding $15,000, and in many major metropolitan areas climbing well past $20,000 a year per child. And here is the detonation that most parents do not yet see coming, because the entire fragile system has been held together for the past few years by a river of federal pandemic-era funding that was quietly poured into childcare providers to keep their doors open. And that money has run out. When it dries up, and it is drying up right now heading into this fall, thousands of childcare centers across the country face closure. And the ones that survive have no choice but to raise their prices even higher to cover costs that the federal money used to absorb, which means the single most expensive line item in a working family's budget is about to climb again at the exact moment every other cost in this video is also climbing. And the cruelty of the mechanism is that it attacks the family's ability to earn at the same moment it attacks their ability to spend, because when childcare becomes more expensive than one parent's entire take-home pay, that parent is effectively forced out of the workforce, not by choice, but by arithmetic, and a household that was surviving on 2 incomes suddenly collapses to 1, right as the rent renews, the premium doubles, and the grocery bill climbs. This is the trap that has no good exit, because if the parent keeps working, the childcare devours the paycheck, and often more than the paycheck, and if the parent stops working to care for the child, the household loses an entire income and often the health insurance attached to it, and either road leads downward. The people this crushes hardest are the exact families the economy claims to celebrate. The dual-earner working parents in their late 20s and 30s, the ones who followed every rule, got the education, built the careers, waited to have children until they felt financially ready, and are now discovering that financially ready is a moving target that the system quietly moved out of reach. Single parents face a version of this with no escape at all, because there is no second income to fall back on and no partner to stay home, which means for millions of single mothers especially, the childcare cliff this fall is not a hard choice, it is a cliff with no bottom visible. Millions of American parents will spend this fall making a decision no parent should ever have to make, weighing whether they can afford to keep working against whether they can afford to stop, calculating the cost of raising their own child against the income that raising that child makes impossible to earn, trapped in a system that has made the most basic act of family life, having a job and a child at the same time, into a financial impossibility, quietly, while everyone told them this was simply the cost of choosing to have a family in America. The money sitting in your checking account feels like the safest thing you own, and that feeling is exactly the vulnerability. Because the regional banks holding the deposits of ordinary Americans are sitting on losses they have not yet been forced to reveal, and this fall is when that reckoning arrives. Nothing feels safer than the money in your bank account, the balance you can check on your phone, the number that sits there quietly promising that whatever else goes wrong, at least that is solid ground. And I need you to understand this fall why that feeling of safety is precisely the thing that makes it dangerous. The small and regional banks where most ordinary Americans and most small businesses actually keep their money are sitting on a mountain of exposure they have been quietly hoping the world would not notice because they lent heavily into commercial real estate. The office towers emptied by remote work and the shopping centers hollowed out by online retail, and those buildings are now worth a fraction of the loans written against them, loans that are coming due this fall and next and must be refinanced at interest rates that have roughly doubled. When a building worth less than its loan gets handed back to the bank because the owner walks away, the bank eats the loss, and the Federal Reserve's own economists have documented that these regional and community banks, the ones under $100 billion in assets, hold a larger share of this rotting commercial real estate debt than the giant Wall Street banks do. That is the fuse. And here is the mechanism that makes a bank failure a fall event rather than a distant worry. The thing that took down Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in a matter of days in 2023, faster than anyone believed possible. In the modern era, a bank run does not require people lining up on the sidewalk. It requires only a rumor and a smartphone, because deposits can now be pulled electronically in seconds. And the moment enough depositors sense weakness, they move their money all at once, digitally, silently, draining a bank faster than it can possibly respond. And a bank that was solvent on Monday is gone by Friday. Your deposits under $250,000 are insured. Yes, and I want you to hold on to that, but understand what a regional bank failure does even to the insured, because it freezes lending across an entire region instantly. It chokes off the small business loans that local economies run on. It triggers layoffs at every company that banked there, Olnance, and it sends a wave of fear rippling into every other regional bank as depositors everywhere start pulling their money in a panic, which is exactly how one failure becomes five, and five becomes a cascade. And this is landing this fall on top of everything else in this video. A weakened labor market, a stock market inflated by a single AI bet, a private credit system already freezing, a Federal Reserve caught in a trap that limits how much it can cut rates to catch anyone. Which means the tools that stopped the 2023 bank failures from spreading are weaker now than they were then. Millions of Americans will watch this fall as headlines about a bank they never heard of failing scroll past between other headlines, and they will not feel the danger until it reaches the bank on the corner where their own paycheck is deposited, at which point the safest feeling money they own becomes the money they are suddenly desperate to move, in a system where everyone trying to move at once is the very thing that brings the whole structure down. The food on your table is about to become a luxury you ration, because the grocery bill that already frightens you is heading into its worst stretch of the year on a harvest broken by drought and deportation, while the program that feeds 42 million Americans is being gutted at the exact same moment. Watch what is happening to the most basic thing a human being needs, the food you put on the table, because this fall it is being squeezed from two directions at once, in a way that is going to leave millions of Americans genuinely hungry in the wealthiest country on the planet. On one side, the price. Grocery prices have already climbed more than 25% since 2020, and the crops being harvested right now were grown under a brutal set of conditions. Wide stretches of American farmland gripped by drought, fertilizer costs that spiked during the Middle East conflict and never came back down, and an agricultural labor force gutted by aggressive deportation that has left crops rotting unpicked in the fields because there is no one left to harvest them. That means the relief a good autumn harvest normally brings to food prices is simply not coming this year, and the classic holiday grocery basket is about to become the most expensive in American history, landing at the exact moment demand peaks for the season. On the other side, at the very same time, the safety net that catches families when food becomes unaffordable is being torn away, because SNAP, the food assistance program that feeds roughly 42 million Americans, is absorbing the single largest cut in its entire 60-year history. A reduction of around $186 billion, and the new work requirements are stripping benefits from millions right as the recertification letters go out this fall. Picture the collision. The price of food climbing to a record just as the assistance that helps people buy it is slashed, both curves crossing in the same autumn weeks, and the families caught in the middle discovering that the shelf they could barely afford last year is now out of reach entirely, while the benefit that used to bridge the gap has vanished. And here is the collapse behind the collapse, the detail that removes the last safety net most people assume will always be there, because when families lose SNAP, they turn to food banks, and for every single meal a food bank provides in this country, SNAP provides 9, which means the charitable system everyone imagines will catch the overflow, can replace only a fraction of what the government is pulling away, and those food banks are already reporting lines stretching around the block before the cut even fully lands. The disturbing truth is that hunger in America this fall will not look like the images people expect. It will not be dramatic, it will be quiet, a parent skipping meals so the kids can eat, water added to stretch the soup, the careful math at the register putting the meat back and keeping the rice, the child who is told they already ate. And it compounds with everything else in this video, because a family choosing between food and rent falls behind on rent and meets the eviction machine. A family choosing between food and the electric bill sits in the cold. A family choosing between food and the prescription lets the illness grow. Millions of Americans who have never once in their lives worried about having enough to eat are going to spend this fall doing a kind of arithmetic they never imagined they would face, standing in a grocery aisle in the richest nation in human history, calculating which of their basic needs they can afford to meet this week and which they will have to let go. While the harvest fails, the prices climb, and the help disappears, all at once, all in the same season. When people lose everything at the same time, they do not grieve quietly. They look for someone to blame, and the people who study collapse for a living will tell you the same chilling truth, that economic desperation and social violence have always arrived together. And this fall is delivering the desperation into the most divided America in living memory. Understand what happens to a country, not just to a budget, when millions of people hit the wall in the same season. Because the devastating reality arriving this fall does not stay politely contained inside spreadsheets and eviction courts. It spills into the street, and the historical record on this is grimly consistently clear. Across centuries, scholars who study social collapse have documented the same pattern again and again, that when a large share of a population perceives the system as rigged against them and closed to their children, when the ordinary paths to a stable life are visibly blocked, the anger that builds does not stay private, it organizes, it seeks targets, and it erupts. The populist upheavals of the late 19th century, the desperation of the Great Depression, the unrest of the late 1960s, every one of them ignited when economic expectation collided with structural limit. And here is what makes this fall uniquely combustible, because the desperation is landing on a country that was already a tinderbox before a single one of these crises fully hit. Roughly 70% of Americans have told pollsters the American dream is either dead or was never real. Trust in nearly every institution, Congress, the media, the courts, the banks, has fallen to the lowest levels ever recorded, which means when these institutions fail people this fall, there is no reservoir of faith left to cushion the blow. And the country is more heavily armed and more politically divided than at any point since the Civil War. Tens of millions of firearms in circulation, communities sorted into camps that no longer share a common set of facts or a common sense of who is to blame. Now pour the devastating reality into that. When the eviction notice arrives and the coverage lapses and the childcare closes and the grocery shelf goes out of reach, all in the same autumn, the abstract rage that has simmered under American life for years acquires a concrete trigger and a target. And a population that has lost its faith in the system, while simultaneously losing its home, its health, and its ability to feed its children, is the exact raw material from which genuine upheaval has always been made. The people who analyze this professionally are not describing a remote possibility. They are describing a pattern so reliable that its absence would be the surprise. And the fall is historically when it ignites. Because pain that builds through a hard year tends to boil over as the weather turns cold and the holidays approach, and the unbearable gap between what people have and what the season demands becomes impossible to ignore. Millions will watch this fall as protests they were told were isolated incidents grow into something sustained, as the fury that has been building quietly under the surface of ordinary American life finally finds the spark. And the most disturbing part is not that it might happen, it is that everyone who studies these things already knows. It tends to, and it is arriving into the angriest, most armed, most distrustful America that anyone alive has ever lived through. At the precise moment the systems people depend on are all failing them together. Lay every piece of this devastating reality, side by side on a single calendar, and you will see the thing no expert will ever show you. That these are not separate hardships that happen to share a season. They are connected links in one chain, and each one is engineered to trigger the next. All this fall, here is the exercise that reveals the true shape of what is coming. The one no analyst, no agency, and no news anchor will ever perform for you, because each of them guards only a single corner of this picture, and none of them is responsible for the whole. Lay it out on one calendar and watch the chain assemble itself. The eviction machine, running faster than in a generation, processing more than 1 million households a year. The sealed rental market, locking out the average worker so no one who falls can get back up. The medical debt crisis, detonating as premiums double on November 1st and coverage vanishes. The childcare cliff, snapping as the federal money runs dry and centers close. The regional banks, sitting on losses that a single rumor and a smartphone can turn into a collapse. The grocery bill climbing to a record on a broken harvest while food assistance is slashed for 42 million people. And the social unrest that history says always follows economic desperation, landing on the most divided America in living memory. Now see the thing that should genuinely change how you feel watching this, because these are not 7 separate misfortunes that happen to share an autumn. They are one chain, and each link pulls the next. The doubled health premium forces the family to drop coverage, the uncovered illness produces the $75,000 bill, the unpaid bill destroys the credit score, the destroyed credit score fails the rental screening, the failed screening traps them in a unit they cannot afford. The unaffordable rent meets the eviction machine, the eviction record locks them out of every apartment for 7 years, and the family that started the fall employed and housed ends it displaced. All from a single illness they did not choose. That is the mechanism. Each crisis in this video is a doorway into the next one, and the devastating reality is not that any single one of them might hit you, it is that they are wired in sequence, so that the first one you touch drags you toward all the others. And none of this was coordinated by a single hand in a single room. Which is worse, not better, because a conspiracy could be exposed and stopped. But this is emergent. Dozens of separate decisions made by separate people in separate institutions. The landlord raising the rent, the insurer pulling the subsidy, the lawmaker cutting the food aid, the bank hiding the loss. None of them responsible for the whole. None of them ever asking the one question that actually matters, which is what happens when all of these land on the same family in the same 3 months. Nobody asked, because it was nobody's job to ask. And so the chain was forged, link by link, decision by decision, quietly converging on a single fall, and millions of Americans are about to feel it tighten, each crisis pulling them into the next, wondering how their whole life could come apart so fast, never understanding that it was always one chain, that it was always connected, and that the season it was built to tighten around them is the one that is arriving now. The rescue that every American quietly assumes will always arrive, the checks, the relief, the government stepping in to catch the country, has already been canceled in writing because the nation's own fiscal watchdog has confessed that this time there is nothing left to catch anyone with. Beneath every fear I have described in this video sits one last belief that has kept millions of Americans from fully panicking. The quiet assumption that no matter how bad the fall gets, the government will do what it did in 2008 and again in 2020. Step in, write the checks, send the relief, and catch the country before it hits the ground. I need you to let that belief go tonight before the season arrives, because the one institution whose entire job is to plan for this has already put it in writing that the net is gone. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan watchdog staffed by former directors of the Congressional Budget Office from both parties, published an analysis titled Break Glass, and its opening line stated without softening that the United States has never faced an economic shock as indebted as it is today. Not during the Civil War, not during the Great Depression, not during 2008. The arithmetic behind that sentence is what should chill you. In 2008, the government deployed roughly $1.8 trillion to stop the collapse, and it worked in large part because the national debt was around 64% of the economy, low enough that the world lent the money without hesitation. In 2020, it spent roughly $5 trillion, and even at a debt near 100% of the economy, the borrowing still cleared. But the debt now sits far higher. The total obligations of the country have reached well past 300% of everything it produces. The annual interest bill alone has crossed $1 trillion, now consuming more than the entire military budget. And the watchdog stated plainly that a shock arriving on top of this debt makes the old playbook unusable, because you cannot borrow another $5 trillion when the world is already backing away from your bonds without triggering the exact panic you are trying to prevent. So the emergency response this time will not be rescue, it will be the opposite. And the CRFB spelled it out in its own words: sharp tax increases and spending cuts, an austerity crisis that undermines demand and pushes the economy into a deeper recession, freezes on Social Security, on Medicare,
on the food assistance and the housing help that the vulnerable depend on most.
That is the plan on the shelf, not a stimulus check, not a bailout for the family being evicted or the parent who lost childcare or the worker whose bank just failed. Austerity, delivered to a population already on its knees, at the precise moment it has nothing left to give. And here is the part that turns this from grim to genuinely disturbing, because it means the timing works against you twice. Not only are all the crises in this video converging on the same fall, but the mechanism that has always softened past collapses has been quietly disarmed in advance, so that the shock arrives at full force with the airbag already removed. Millions of Americans are going to spend this fall waiting for the announcement that help is coming, refreshing the news for word of the relief package that arrived every time before, and the most devastating realization of the entire season will be the slow dawning, understanding that this time the announcement is not coming, that the cavalry they have been counting on their whole lives reviewed the situation years ago, concluded quietly that it could no longer afford to ride, and wrote its own surrender into a document it filed away, where it hoped no one would look until it was already far too late to matter. which is exactly this fall. I am not going to end this by handing you 3 comforting tips to survive, because what you just saw is not a storm you can buy supplies for. And the single most devastating truth of this entire video is that the people it comes for this fall will have done absolutely nothing to deserve it. For the length of this entire video, I have not handed you a single opinion, and I need you to carry that with you when you close this and go back to your evening, because everything I described came from the people whose entire careers depend on being right rather than dramatic. From the Princeton Eviction Lab, from KFF and the Urban Institute, from the Federal Reserve Zone economists, from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, none of them fringe voices, none of them with any reason to frighten you, all of them pointing without coordinating at the same narrow season. And the reality they describe is devastating precisely because of who it comes for. Because it does not come for the reckless or the lazy or the people who made obvious mistakes. It comes for the family that paid its rent on time for 20 years until a single illness broke the chain. The parent who did everything right until the childcare closed. The worker who never missed a shift until the bank that held her paycheck failed on a Friday afternoon. This is the part one refuse to soften, because you deserve to hear it plainly. The devastating reality arriving this fall is not a judgment on anyone's character. It is structural, it is scheduled, and it has been assembled quietly, link by link, while millions of people were told the economy was strong and the worst had passed. I am not going to insult you with a checklist, because no individual checklist stops a systemic collapse, and I am not going to sell you comfort you have not earned by watching this all the way to the end. What I will give you is the one honest thing I have, which is this. You have spent this year feeling a dread you could not name, sensing that something under the surface of ordinary life had come loose, wondering if you were the only one who could feel it while everyone on your screen insisted everything was fine. You were not imagining it. You were not being negative. You were not broken. You were early. You felt the chain tightening before you could see it, and now you have seen it. Every link laid out in order, and that clarity is the one thing this fall cannot take from you. The ability to look at what is coming and name it out loud while everyone around you is still pretending it is not there. That will not stop the eviction machine. It will not lower your premium. It will not save the bank or refill the food shelf or bring back the childcare. But in a season built to blindside people, to arrive disguised as a surprise so that everyone it hits believes they were singled out, the refusal to be surprised is not nothing. It is the difference between being a person. The reality happens to, and a person who saw it coming and understood exactly what it was, who knew it was not their fault, who recognized it as one connected thing arriving in one connected season, and who faced it with their eyes open while the rest of the country was still being told to look away. That is the only thing I can honestly promise you tonight, and in a fall like the one that is coming, it may be the only thing anyone can